Colonial period. When Christopher Columbus reached Trinidad in 1498 on his third voyage, the island was inhabited by Arawakan-speaking tribal groups originally from the Orinoco River Delta region and a smaller number of Caribbean speakers. In the 16th century, many of these Trinidadian Indians were captured by Spanish slave traders and sent to work in other Spanish possessions, but there was no effective Spanish presence on the island until 1592. In that year, Antonio de Berrio came in search of El Dorado, the mythical land of gold. He took official possession of the island and founded San Jose of Orona, now Saint Joseph, which served as the capital until 1784. Even after 1592, the development of the island proceeded slowly. Few Spaniards immigrated to Trinidad, only a handful of African slaves were imported, and there was little production or export. In the 17th and early 18th centuries, tobacco and, later, cacao were cultivated, using Trinidadian Indian labor, but after a disastrous failure of the cacao crop in the 1720s, the industry declined. The island remained undeveloped until the late 18th century. From 1776, the Spanish government encouraged Roman Catholics from the other Caribbean islands to settle in Trinidad with their slaves. This immigration became significant after the Cedula Decree of 1783, which offered generous land and tax incentives to settlers, and transformed Trinidad's population, economy, and society. Most of the settlers were French, and French influence became dominant. Many slaves were brought in from the other colonies and from Africa. Plantations were established, production of cotton and sugar began, and trade increased markedly. By 1797, when Britain seized the island from Spain, Trinidad had begun its development as a plantation economy and a slave society. Trinidad was formally ceded to Britain in 1802. Under British rule, Trinidad's development as a sugar colony continued, although in 1806-07 the slave trade was completely prohibited. Slavery was abolished in two stages between 1834 and 1838, and the sugarcane planters were unable to secure the steady, tractable, and cheap labor they wanted. In 1845 the immigration of indentured workers from the Indian subcontinent began. It continued until 1917. As early as 1870, about one-fourth of the total population consisted of Indo-Trinidadians. The original Trinidadian Indian inhabitants had by then virtually disappeared. Other immigrants came to Trinidad after 1838 from the smaller British Caribbean colonies, Africa, as free settlers rescued from foreign slave ships, Madeira, China, Syria, Lebanon, Venezuela, and the United Kingdom. Trinidad's population became one of the most heterogeneous in the Caribbean. Tobago, also sighted by Columbus in 1498, did not have any permanent European settlement until the 18th century. Its development as a sugar colony began when it was ceded to Britain in 1763 and continued throughout the period from 1763 to 1814, during which time Tobago changed hands between Britain and France several times. Tobago's sugar production peaked in the 1790s but began an irreversible decline after 1807. Tobago was ceded to Britain for the last time in 1814, but by then its importance as a sugar exporting colony had already begun to wane. Tobago had its own bicameral legislature until 1874. In 1889, with the island's economy in shambles as a result of the collapse of its sugar industry, Tobago was amalgamated with Trinidad, while retaining a subordinate legislature and separate taxes. In this way the United Colony of Trinidad and Tobago was created. In 1899 Tobago became a ward, administrative district, of Trinidad and Tobago. Unlike most of the other British West Indian colonies, including Tobago, Trinidad was never granted a bicameral legislature with an elected assembly. Instead, it was governed as a crown colony, with a governor and, from 1831, a legislative council consisting of top officials and so-called unofficial members nominated by the governor. The constitution of the Crown Colony underwent no significant modification until 1925. During the British colonial period, many activists sought to change the constitution to allow the inclusion of some elected members on the Trinidad and Tobago Legislative Council. In 1925 a constitutional reform did that, adding 7 elected members. Further agitation, especially an island-wide series of strikes and riots in 1937 under Grenadine-born labor leader Uriah Butler, led to the grant of universal suffrage in 1945 and other constitutional reforms that provided for a measure of self-government. For about 10 years after universal suffrage, politics in the colony were characterized by individualism and confusion, but in 1956 the People's National Movement, PNM, won a victory at the polls and formed the first party-based cabinet government, under the PNM's founder and leader, Eric Williams. Trinidad and Tobago attained independence in 1962 and became a republic within the Commonwealth in 1976. Independent Trinidad and Tobago. The PNM won 6 consecutive elections and held power from 1956 to 1986. This continuity and stability in government were accompanied by economic problems and social unrest, which broke out in widespread disturbances in 1970–71. The oil boom in 1973–81 brought sudden prosperity to most sections of the population, and Trinidad and Tobago entered a period of rapid development and industrialization. A substantial state sector and fairly comprehensive social welfare programs were created from the petroleum profits, while the private sector expanded rapidly. A collapse in oil prices, along with the PNM's failure to win support from most Indo-Trinidadians and deep-seated corruption, led to a marked decline in the party's popularity after 1981, the year of Williams's death. In December 1986 the National Alliance for Reconstruction, NAR, a coalition party led by A.N.R. Robinson, won the majority of seats on a program calling for divestment of most state-owned companies, reorganization of the civil service, and structural readjustment of the economy in the light of shrinking oil revenues. Although the NAR government succeeded somewhat in stimulating economic growth while keeping inflation low, its policies were widely resented, and the party was damaged by splits and defections. In July 1990 a small radical Muslim group attempted a coup, in which several ministers, including Robinson, the Prime Minister, were held hostage for 6 days. The NAR was defeated in elections in December 1991, and the PNM returned to power. The PNM government of 1991–95 continued most of the economic and social policies inaugurated by its NAR predecessors. In 1995 the Prime Minister called an early general election. The result was a tie between the PNM and the main opposition party, the United National Congress, UNC, which was supported chiefly by Indo-Trinidadians. The 2 Tobago seats went to the NAR, led by Robinson. The latter gave his support to the UNC, whose leader, Bastio Ponde, thus became Prime Minister. Ponde was the first Indo-Trinidadian Prime Minister, and his government was the first in Trinidad and Tobago to be controlled by a party whose electoral base was the Indo-Trinidadian population. After leaving office, Ponde was charged in 2002 with having failed to declare assets to the Parliamentary Integrity Commission. The UNC government pursued economic and social policies generally similar to those of the NAR and PNM governments of 1986–95. There was considerable new investment, especially in tourism, petrochemicals, and natural gas. Since the beginning of the 21st century, Trinidad and Tobago has continued its rapid pace of industrial development, which included building liquefied natural gas plants and steel smelters. The state-owned sugar producer and refiner, Coroni Limited, was closed down in 2003, but some independent cane farmers continued production for the rum industry. Others turned to the cultivation of alternative crops such as cassava and fruits, and a compensation plan was offered to former sugar industry workers. Trinidad's folklore actually took root here from the 1780s with the arrival of enslaved Africans and the French-speaking planters who were themselves a mixture of both white, black, and mixed-race people. They hailed from the French islands, Grenada, Saint Lucia, Dominica, Martinique, Guadeloupe, with some even as far away as Haiti. Our folklore expresses an element of syncretism that joined West African religious beliefs with Catholicism against the dominant French culture of Trinidad in those long-time days. All the characters have French names. They are essentially of African origin. The picture presented is full of color and decorated with a wealth of detail, all in keeping with well-recognized West African traditions. As such, the island's folklore, its many supernatural figures, possesses characteristics that are similar to those of West African deities. Indeed, it is difficult to draw a dividing line between the strictly religious elements and what may be described as legendary traditions. These myths and legends, as they are now known, were originally teaching stories that warned, for instance, against the wanton destruction of the forest, as in the case of Papa Bois. Papa Bois is remembered as the old man of the forest and is known by many names, including Maître Bois and Daddy Bouchan. He may be associated with Papa Legba, who serves as the guardian of the potomet and the center of power and support in the home. Papa Bois appears in different forms, sometimes as a deer or in old ragged clothes, sometimes hairy and though very old, extremely strong and muscular, with cloven hoofs and leaves growing out of his beard. As the guardian of the animals and the custodian of the trees, he is known to sound a cow's horn to warn his friends of the approach of hunters. He doesn't tolerate killing for killing's sake, or the wanton destruction of the forest. There are many stories of Papa Bois appearing to hunters. Sometimes he turns into a deer that would lead the men into the deep forest, and then he would suddenly resume his true shape, to issue a stern warning and then to vanish, leaving the hunters lost or perhaps compelling them to pay a fine of some sort. If you should meet with Papa Bois, be very polite. Bonjour, vieux papa, or bon matin, maître, should be your greeting. If he pauses to pass the time with you, stay cool, and do not look at his feet. The La Diablesse is the spirit of women who have been wronged by bad men. She never haunts women. She is the dark side of Urzuli or Ezali, the Haitian/West African spirit of love, dancing, luxury, beauty, jewelry and flowers. The La Diablesse is sometimes personified as an old crone who steps forth with her cloven hoof from behind a tree on a lonely road, the sound of chains mingling with the rustle of her petticoat. Sometimes she appears as a tall, handsome Creole woman who, with swinging gait and erect stature, passes through a cane or cocoa field at noon and catches the eye of a man. He then proceeds to follow her, and, never being able to catch up with her, her feet hardly touch the ground, finds himself lost, bewildered, far from home, and he is never himself again, having lost his shadow. She may have a bag of bones, graveyard dirt and shells. She may cast a spell and be perceived as young and desirable, her rich perfume blending with the smell of damp and decaying things. Although she may appear young, she will be dressed in the ancient costume of these islands, a brilliant madras turban in which zipping tremblant, trembling pins of gold, catch the dim moonlight, a low chemise with half sleeves and much embroidery and lace, and all the finery of the bygone days. She is the nemesis of the Horner man, the womanizer, the wife-beater. What she can do for you is give you something far worse than tabanka. Papa Bois is remembered as the old man of the forest and is known by many names, including Maître Bois and Daddy Bouchan. He may be associated with Papa Legba, who serves as the guardian of the potomet and the center of power and support in the home. Papa Bois appears in different forms, sometimes as a deer or in old ragged clothes, sometimes hairy and though very old, extremely strong and muscular, with cloven hoofs and leaves growing out of his beard. As the guardian of the animals and the custodian of the trees, he is known to sound a cow's horn to warn his friends of the approach of hunters. He doesn't tolerate killing for killing's sake, or the wanton destruction of the forest. There are many stories of Papa Bois appearing to hunters. Sometimes he turns into a deer that would lead the men into the deep forest, and then he would suddenly resume his true shape, to issue a stern warning and then to vanish, leaving the hunters lost or perhaps compelling them to pay a fine of some sort. If you should meet with Papa Bois, be very polite. Bonjour, vieux papa, or bon matin, Matra, should be your greeting. If he pauses to pass the time with you, stay cool, and do not look at his feet. Douens are spirits of children who died before they were baptized, and as such, they are fated to roam the byways of Trinidad, practicing their wide repertoire of pranks on living children who are enticed away only to return later on as if nothing ever happened. Douens are depicted as sexless, their feet are turned backwards, demonstrating that they come from the other side, and they have no faces, although they do have small round mouths. On their rather large heads they wear huge mushroom-shaped straw hats. To prevent the Douens from calling your children, never shout their names in open places, as the Douens will take their names, call them and lure them away. The child, however, is not affected in any way by the Douen. It is the mother, the father, the child's guardian who is haunted by the Douen. Imagine you come home and you can't find your child. You become hysterical. That is the Douen. It is inside your head. Here is a story of a Jumbi. A man called Lastaki, who was riding home one night, as he passed the big silk cotton tree at the corner of Belmont Circular Road and the Savannah, he heard a baby crying, so he stopped and picked it up, thinking he would take it home for the night and carry it to the orphanage in the morning. Cycling along, he was reduced to a state of absolute terror as by the time he reached Bajerningam Avenue, he realized that the child was getting bigger and heavier. Suddenly, just outside the hospital, the child said in a man's voice, "You'd better take me back where you found me," which the terrified Lastaki did at once. As he drew nearer the tree, the child shrank steadily back to its original size and was deposited, once more, a bawling baby at the foot of the giant tree. The moon, a silent witness, hid its face in a cloud as a chill wind blew and a Jumbi bird flew out of the tree. The La Diablesse is the spirit of women who have been wronged by bad men. She never haunts women. She is the dark side of Urzuli or Ezali, the Haitian/West African spirit of love, dancing, luxury, beauty, jewelry and flowers. The La Diablesse is sometimes personified as an old crone who steps forth with her cloven hoof from behind a tree on a lonely road, the sound of chains mingling with the rustle of her petticoat. Sometimes she appears as a tall, handsome Creole woman who, with swinging gait and erect stature, passes through a cane or cocoa field at noon and catches the eye of a man. He then proceeds to follow her, and, never being able to catch up with her, her feet hardly touch the ground, finds himself lost, bewildered, far from home, and he is never himself again, having lost his shadow. She may have a bag of bones, graveyard dirt and shells, she may cast a spell and be perceived as young and desirable, her rich perfume blending with the smell of damp and decaying things. Although she may appear young, she will be dressed in the ancient costume of these islands, a brilliant madras turban in which zipping tremblant, trembling pins of gold, catch the dim moonlight, a low chemise with half sleeves and much embroidery and lace, and all the finery of the bygone days. She is the nemesis of the Horner man, the womanizer, the wife beater. What she can do for you is give you something far worse than tabanka. Mama Dlo or Mama Dlo is a water spirit, perhaps reminiscent of Yemenjia, a water goddess from the Yoruba tradition. She warns against vanity. Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster, and if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you. Her name is derived from the French Maman Dlo, which means mother of the water. A hideous creature, her lower half takes the form of an anaconda. She is sometimes thought to be the lover of Papa Bois, and old hunters tell stories of coming upon them in the high woods. They also tell of hearing a loud cracking sound, which is said to be the sound made by her tail as she snaps it on the surface of a mountain pool or a still lagoon. Mortal men who commit crimes against the forest, like burning down trees, indiscriminately putting animals to death or fouling the rivers, could find themselves married to her for life, both this one and the one to follow. Sometimes she takes the form of a beautiful woman singing silent songs on still afternoons, sitting at the water's edge in the sunlight, lingering for a golden moment, a flash of green gone. If you were to meet Mama Dlo in the forest and wish to escape her, take off your left shoe, turn it upside down and immediately leave the scene, walking backwards until you reach home. The Sukuyant, a ball of flame, along she came flying without a wind, was how the Sukuyant of Sotdo Island was described. She is the old woman who lives alone at the end of the village road, seldom seen, her house always closed up as she sleeps away the day. As evening draws near, she stirs and sheds her old and wrinkled skin, which she deposits into a mortar that she hides carefully away. Now, as a glowing ball of flame, she rises up through the roof and with a shrill cry that sets the village dogs howling, she flies through the night in search of a victim, and she would suck his lifeblood from him clean. As the blessed day dawns, she makes a beeline through the forest for her home, finds the mortar with her wretched skin and proceeds to put it on. But something's wrong, it burns like fire, it seems to shrink and slide away. Skin, kin, you know me, she sings, crooning softly, pleading to the wrinkled, dreadful thing. You know me, old skin. Then, with horror, she realizes the dreadful thing that has been done. The village boys and men have filled her skin with coarse salt and pepper and will soon come and get her, with a drum of boiling tar, the priest and his silver cross, the church bells, and then, the end. This is a witch story. One has to be very careful about witch stories, because women often outlive their husbands and end up owning house and land. It is easy to suspect that the old woman who lives alone is a Sukuyant, so that what she has could be taken from her. Sukuyant comes from the French word soupçon, which means suspicion. The Lagahoo or Lagahoo of Trinidad and Tobago is a terrifying figure in local folklore, often depicted as a headless specter burdened with a wooden coffin adorned with flickering candles. Bound by chains, it roams the darkness in search of victims, sometimes shape-shifting into animals or draining the life from its prey. The Lagahoo's eerie image and predatory nature make it a powerful symbol of fear and superstition in the region. He has his origins in the obeahman, the poisoner on the estate from slavery days. The master is cruel. The ox falls to its knees in the field, there is fire in the mountain, the mistress's back is raised with fiery welts every time he beats the old woman who is in charge of the chamber pots. A fellow slave can no longer live in this misery, he gives her what she needs to go home. With emancipation, he is the old magic-dealing man of a district who is both feared and respected, not only for his facility to change his form to that of a vicious animal, but also because he has power over nature. From him, charms and bush medicine are also readily available for a price. At times, the apparition may take the form of a coffin being carried through the streets. A man, naked, greased from head to toe, carries it on his head. He is protected by a giant phantom. The coffin and its gruesome attendant were once used to facilitate the uninterrupted transportation of bushram. This effect would virtually ensure its safe passage. At another time, the Lagahoo becomes the science man. He reads from the Talmud and other forbidden books. He can make a deal with the devil for you. In exchange for your soul, you would become famous, go viral, and become rich beyond your wildest dreams. But one night you will wake up and the devil will be sitting on your belly. He has come for your soul. Today he is the drug dealer, the gang recruiter. If you want to see a Lagahoo and not be seen by it, take some yampi from the corner of a dog's eye, put it in your eye and peep out of a keyhole at 12 midnight. It is said that those powers are handed down in some old families from one generation to the next, and that is why there are so many Lagahoos among us. To protect against the Lagahoo, Caribbean folklore offers various methods, including the use of blessed salt and holy water to ward off evil spirits. Rosemary is another popular protective herb, either burned or worn in sachets and jewelry. Additional precautions involve avoiding graveyards at night and staying indoors after dark, as the Lagahoo is believed to be most active during these hours. These protective measures reflect the deep cultural belief in the supernatural and the need to safeguard oneself from harm.